Hi, my name is Stephanie Williams, and I work at the Wardlaw Museum at the University of St. Andrews. Today I'm going to tell you a bit about the Recording Scotland collection. In 1942, the Recording Scotland collection scheme was established to create a permanent record, visual record, of Scotland. Now, if we think to our history books, we'll remember that in the 1940s, Great Britain was in the midst of World War II, and times were changing. It was a scary time for the British people. Not only had they already sent their fathers, sons, and brothers to the front to fight, they were trying to protect their own lives and property back home. It was these special things, these places that people were fighting to protect, that they also wanted to document. And that meant creating a scheme that would protect those places. Now, it so happened that in 1930, a businessman from America was so moved by the efforts of the British people during World War I that he decided to put his millions of dollars to work. His name was Edward Harkness, and he had inherited millions of dollars from his father, who had invested well. Mr. Harkness ultimately was just about the sixth wealthiest man during World War I, and because he felt so fondly towards the British people, he donated funds to museums, art institutions, and hospitals. And so his funds went to the Recording Scotland scheme. Now, initially, it started as a Recording Britain scheme, with painters being sent out all over England first. And then later, Scotland was due its own group, an own collection. So these paintings are just about Scotland. Now, Mr. Harkness donated the funds through a group called the Pilgrim Trust, and they were going to be the ones that kind of oversaw everything. And it was established that there should be a committee, and the committee should accept paintings or turn them away and create this permanent record. Now, a good question, why watercolors? Did they have cameras? They did. In the 1940s, you could have taken a photograph. It was black and white, but it was hard detail of these locations. And so it meant that, especially during wartime, there were certainly a lot of artists who were out of work. And so the scheme also helped put artists back to work. Now, they would send them out to different locations or look to what the artists had already created. And the reason they chose watercolors is it is a distinctly British institution. It's something that is a favored cultural tradition to paint with watercolors, these soft lines. It's beautiful. And also watercolors add literal color to the images, and they give you a sense of emotion based on what the artist is painting. And so this was a way to approach collecting the history. And don't worry, ultimately there was also a plan to document architecture through photography as well, also funded through the Pilgrim Trust. But in this point, we're talking about the watercolors. And in the Recording Scotland collection, it wasn't actually just watercolors. There are a few oil paintings and some pencil sketches. So a combination of things, but they did focus mainly on watercolors. Now, for the artists who got chosen, both men and women contributed work to the collection, and they were only paid between £5 to £20 for their art, which is still fairly cheap for them. And I know they certainly would have wanted to make more money, but times were as they were, and so ultimately they accepted it. Now, the artists had to go out and collect these images, and another good question is, what were they collecting? What images were they looking at? Now, you have to think for yourself. When you go someplace new, what kind of postcard do you buy? What image do you post to Instagram? What do you want to remember forever? And for them, it was landscapes. It was these historic settings. It was these beautiful structures that they were afraid were going to be changed forever during the war. And I like to say the Recording Scotland collection really covers the churches, crofts, and castles. When you look at our collection, you'll see that it's everything from Edinburgh Castle all the way to a barn with chickens. And through the artwork that we can see, you also have to listen for what the artist is telling you about that day. Now, certainly this artwork was done in the 1940s, but it seems really timeless. When you look to the images of the harbors and the towns, you see a few people, very few in fact, and they're dwarfed by their surroundings. You usually don't see a fine amount of detail of the person. Sometimes even the clothes are hard to make out, and a lot of times you don't know even what they're doing. And so they are part of the landscape, but they're not the focus. This was kind of contributing to catching that old world approach to Scottish history. And so we look at it to understand what life was like in the 1940s and even earlier. Now, beyond that, the landscapes are amazing. They cover everything from these, grand castle architectures to a very common harbor with people working with nets. Now, when the artists went out and explored these landscapes, it was dangerous too. During the war, you didn't trust everybody. Maybe they could be a spy. And so it was difficult sometimes to get to places. And you can see what they prized as far as the committee, what they chose. Because remember, there was lots of paintings as options, and this is what they chose to tell you about Scotland during this time period. Now, ultimately, the Recording Scotland collection has over 130 paintings, and if you go to the University of St. Andrews website, you can actually explore them. You can see a map and find out where the paintings were taken. You can see a bit about the artists, both the men and women who contributed. And you can just explore the different themes that these artists are looking